In a fairly recent video, I said that I'm tired of making videos about Sweden. It felt like it was getting old to just point out repeatedly that someone has shit the bed regarding my homeland. It was feeling a bit stale to just time and time again point out that yes, Sweden is indeed in a bad place when it comes to our public discourse, freedom of speech, political policies, law and order, and national security, but I've changed my mind. Swedish news has never been more in need of being covered. Sweden is rapidly changing. Well, rapidly according to Swedish standards at least. We've never been much for revolutions. But still, what a year it has been. We now have a growing national acceptance about the fact that we have serious problems with integration and the resulting crime. And yes, we do have serious problems with sloppy and unchecked border security and with people residing illegally within this country. And we now to a far greater extent are spared from the pixelated faces of rapists and killers in our newspapers. Have you seen this man? Followed by a picture of a mosaic mess having been caught by a subway security camera. That nonsense is becoming more and more rare. There also exists a growing consensus regarding that we cannot afford to keep going down the same destructive path which we've been herded into by social democrats for several decades. All of this was completely denied just a couple of years ago. Human beings should be allowed to cost money, we were told, without ever thinking about the citizens that would actually be forced to pay. The Sweden Democrats have grown side by side with the ever-increasing amount of bombings in our biggest cities, and only the severely delusional still believe that social democrats will be able to lead this nation forward. It's a typical example of how people, once the shit hits the fan, often due to progressive idealism, socialist policies, and wasteful governing, always come crawling back towards the right and search for safety, law and order, and a type of stability which can only be found in the familiar and the traditional. I will in this coming year make more but shorter videos while returning to the basics, the type of content I started off by making, covering idiotic articles by far left Swedish journalists trying to further flawed and harmful political agendas, debunking stupid and factually incorrect arguments coming from arrogant politicians and pundits. Fact-checking the incompetent is a very important job to do, and it really shows the sad state of Swedish journalism that me, a layman, am completely able to do this. I should be required to do in-depth research about the topics being covered by Swedish activists/journalists, but in order to disprove their claims, I in practice merely need to scratch the surface, and that is really tragic. I do my homework on the topics that are being discussed, but a lot of the time I'm actually working too hard because these people are lazy. Sweden is interesting to talk about again because it's a country which in many ways is the future for a lot of other nations. If they don't leave the path of political correctness, emotionally driven policymaking, weak on crime laws, and oikophobic contempt and denial of their own culture and national identity. That's why you should care about Sweden. Sweden will be the future for a lot of countries in Europe. Bombings, people being shot in broad daylight, gang rapes, and constant threats of terrorism. That is the result of an open and multicultural society without any demands, obligations, or expectations. Sweden is not a multicultural success story. Anybody telling you that is a liar. Sweden is today a deeply fractured country with problems constantly erupting between different groups, all collectively being called immigrants while culturally often having very little in common. And of course there's conflicts with the native population. The gaps in wealth, employment, and occupational mobility have never been greater than they are today between ethnic Swedes and immigrants. Because the pretty multicultural experiment has failed. A lot of immigrant groups keep failing while we now are prophesized to soon be entering an economic depression. And 8 out of 10 municipalities are going to have to in practice do some serious cost cutting next year, greatly harming the welfare of all Swedes. And it is primarily due to having received a massive amount of people without first having had a plan about what to do with them. And Swedes are now revolting against this. Considering the large amount of taxes we pay into this country every year, it is unacceptable that we are seeing a failure from the state in providing security, healthcare, and education. Blind trust in big government hasn't paid off, and as the cogs of the Swedish people's cherished welfare state begins to lock up, starting with the now economically struggling smaller municipalities, more and more people are saying enough. 2020 will be a year in which we will either set a new course for Sweden and allow us who love this country to begin to see a potential future, and an end to monstrous wasting of money that's been raked in through sky-high taxation and is spent on everyone else except those who are paying. A future without monthly bomb attacks and weekly shootings. Or we will choose a path for Sweden which will make it further deteriorate and will continue to climb ladders on just about every list that you don't want to find yourself on. Unemployment, welfare dependency, healthcare waiting lines, debt, shooting, bombings, and sexual assault. We might finally have a unification of the major conservative parties and give our red and green government a run for their money after our election in 2022. Or the Swedish people might continue to vote against their own self-interest like they did in 2018, and again put their trust in people who clearly demonstrate time and time again that they are deserving of neither trust, respect, or the power to which they so frantically cling. The Social Democrats are losing support in the polls, but the difference between the Social Democrats and Sweden Democrats is despite this still within the marginal of error, and there's a long way to go until election day. Either way, I'm going to be here to call out the bullshit which will inevitably come our way from Swedish far-left journalists and opportunist EU lapdogs in our government. That's the only thing that's ever been easy for me with my channel, to find stories to cover, because all I really need to do is to keep track of the constant flow of idiocy being produced by the very people who actually should be having the greatest amount of knowledge and insight into the current social and political issues of this nation. But instead, there are some of the blindest people out there, rarely leaving their ivory towers, yet still finding it to be fitting to preach the truth to the unwashed masses. I'm working on several new videos. Some of them are about Sweden, some of them are about other topics, but I dare say that all of them have the potential of being really interesting. I want to thank you all who have been supporting this channel, and I want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I will see you all again in 2020, and it looks like it's going to be one hell of a year. Bye.
How low can you get giving Kris Kringle a parking ticket at Christmas Eve?